Africa is not new to the socialist or communist ideas, or even not, we don't consider a revolution something foreign to us. In fact, I think at the moment, Africa is breathing life to a new world from the anti colonial struggles of the mid 20th century to the sanctioned socialist experiments in countries such as Ghana, Guinea Bissau, Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola. We have witnessed that the objective basis for socialism has long existed amidst the imperial super exploitation of our people.
Welcome to the Global Majority for Peace podcast. I'm Ileana Chan. Every week on this podcast, we discuss with special guests from across the world our mission of building a global movement to promote peace and challenge the US-led war drive against China, Russia, and countries in the global south. So please subscribe, comment, share our videos. We will be putting the first part of this interview on YouTube and the full episode on Patreon. So please become a patron on Patreon and support our work. It is also available as a podcast every Saturday on Spotify, Amazon, and Amazon Music. It also goes out as a podcast and a transcript on Patreon. So please subscribe. Today, we are very happy to introduce our amazing guest for Global Majority for Peace, Ajiambo Ashlyn. Ajiambo Ashlyn is the Secretary of International Affairs of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya and member of the PoliTeknik International Editorial Board. Welcome, Ashlyn.
Thank you so much. Red salute, comrades, friends, and all our viewers joining us. I am really happy to be part and parcel of this session today. Ajiambo Ashlyn, like it was mentioned, a member of the Communist Party Marxist Kenya, and also have been able to work as a popular educator in the party and also locally in the country as well as regionally. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that as we continue with the discussions, we will unpack a few things. Thank you so much.
Great. I'm so happy you're here too. There's a lot to unpack here. I don't know that much about this region of the world, to be honest. So I'm like very curious about it. So I'm just like absolutely delighted that you're here to educate me as well. We like to start every interview though with kind of like a bit of a personal note about how do people get politicized? How do they get to their particular worldview? So for you, do you think there was a specific incident in your life or like how did you become so political?
Tough question. I didn't just choose to become political in how I approach issues. It was almost inevitable and compulsory given the harsh material conditions of our people here in Kenya and across the continent. I'll say that I came of age in a neighborhood plagued by the kind of poverty that doesn't just deprive people of their material comfort, but also dignity and basic necessities of life. Growing up in this environment characterized by teenage pregnancies, school dropouts, so as to support their families, massive extrajudicial killings of young people. Once in a while, youth are being gunned down, yet they are not the hardened criminals. We know where the criminals are. This only confirms that the root causes of these issues is in the system. So essentially, the system isn't broken. I think it's working exactly as it was designed to. I also take pride in saying that I am a product of active student activism. When I joined university back in 2019, I became acquainted with progressive debates in campus and also got engaged in student organizing. This was very integral to me, or was the starting point of me understanding the world differently, because this became my first taste of collective power. In campus, we participated in a number of protests and demonstrations over tuition fees, worker solidarity campaigns, student politics. And it was not just about academics, but it was more of using education as a tool of liberation and also to demand for justice, more of taking control over our lives. And I think once you've been part of what people's power can do when they organize together, you can't unsee it. So from that point, I think I fully committed myself to joining radical and progressive spaces. So even joining the party in 2020, 2021, it wasn't just about the theory that was being inculcated into me, but it was more of restoring humanity to our people, reclaiming our dignity as historically oppressed people. So for me, I think I joined the progressive and revolutionary forces out of love for my people, for true patriotism, for justice, and for the fight for dignity. So with that, I think the question that remains for us as the working class is that if we are not organized to challenge and change what's happening within the capitalist logic, then this means that we are being dragged to conform to it. So I think if we stand up united, we're able to pull ourselves out of this menace. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of optimism when we look at Africa right now, the whole region. There's a lot of optimism that we don't necessarily feel here in the West for our countries, you know. So I'm glad to hear you say that. That's really nice. On May 9th, despite a boycott from the West, 29 foreign leaders attended the Victory Day military parade in Moscow. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso attended as a special VIP guest of Russian President Vladimir Putin. 5 other African countries attended as well. Can you explain the significance of this in this moment?
9th May marks a symbolic date. I usually termed as the Victory Day. So Victory Day is significantly important, not only for the Russian Federation or other Soviet states, but I'll say generally for the world, especially the revolutionaries who commemorate the defeat of Nazi Germany. So it is a historical moment largely shaped by the Soviet sacrifices and the people's military might. This is not merely about military victory, but also about the affirmation of socialist resistance against fascism. And recently, there have been a number of anti-fascist forums being held in different parts of the world, but especially here in the global south. So I'll say that this particular date is a living, breathing commitment to the collective total liberation of the oppressed people. So it stands as a call to unity, resistance, and enduring strength for the working people of the world, not just here in Africa. But funny enough, this year's event was special. It was special because it made visible the emerging global realignment, one that, increasingly pits the imperialist goal. These are mainly the Western powers, led by NATO, against the rising axis of the anti-imperialist struggle in the global south. But what is this realignment about? What does it signal? For us, I think the first thing is the realignment signals a crisis of legitimacy in the Western liberal capitalist democracies. It actually exposes the failures of the so-called democracies of the West that most countries usually want to get to, or most countries have been conditioned to actually emulate. So for a long time, the West have maintained hegemony, and hegemony is not just necessarily the military might or economic power of the so-called powerful countries, But I think hegemony is more of imposing your interest on society as a whole. But this is what they're losing. It is the soft power that they're losing, as we witness this global shift. Another thing also is the emergence of multipolar institutions that challenge the IMF and World Bank dominance. Because recently we also are witnessing the founding of multilateral avenues such as BRICS, talk of the group of 77 plus China, and it's a clear indication of the shift to a rising global south. And this is very significant to us because it guarantees victory for us, the oppressed, and we still need to perfect a concrete program, and have unwavering confidence in our ability to achieve the victory that we want. Because as it is right now, with the US hegemony and relenting imperialism, this hasn't worked for our people. And it's clear that it cannot be fixed. But the steps that have been taken by this realignment, it's a stepping stone for us to recognize that there is hope in building a world of dignity for our people. I think thirdly, I'll say that the realignment also brings about the revival of sovereignty and self-determination as a rallying point in the global south. Here in Kenya, the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya, is advancing the national democratic revolution. That in itself is a call for, unity among progressive forces so as to finish or to complete the independence. Because as we live now, we are not living the freedom we want. We are not living the dignity we want. We are not living the conditions that we actually anticipated for after the sham independence. But with the new defiance, the new resistance, it's more of the revival to reclaim the sovereignty for our people. Also, I think it's a rejection of the Western military intervention. The coups, the regime change in disguise of humanitarianism or combating counterterrorism. So even as we look at the many forums that are being put in place by this rising axis, I think it opens opportunities for us. You also mentioned about President Ibrahim Traoré presence.
We could expand on that because, of course, Traoré has become a symbol of neo-colonial anti-imperial resistance. To many, a hopeful indication of the shift to a rising global south. I mean, I think his presence at the Victory Day military parade, in a way that he was like a special VIP guest, etc., definitely demonstrates this. But the Western media is painting him as a dangerous dictator who is rolling back civil liberties. Can you explain the significance of him to the movements that you were discussing and his presence at the Victory Day military parade? What does that mean to you? Does that have any wider significance? And what is the reality on the ground?
President Ibrahim Traoré's presence, I think for us it was particularly significant because since he took power back in 2022, Burkina Faso has transformed from a weak outpost of foreign finance capital into a strong, sovereign, and self-reliant nation. It comes with both quantitative and qualitative kind of changes, but under his able leadership, Traoré has really changed the logic that has as well as been witnessed with regime change. So Burkina Faso has chanted a new path, a path of national democratic freedoms, talk of free from the dictates of the Bretton Woods institution and economic stranglehold of the CFA franc zone. So Traoré's attendance signals a strategic pivot away from the neo-colonial influence of France and the Western imperialists towards an alliance rooted in mutual sovereignty, revolutionary Pan-Africanism unity, as well as anti-imperialist struggle, and also an alternative multipolar solidarity. So I think his attendance there reflects on deepening alignment between parts of Africa and emerging multipolar powers like Russia, China, Iran, and even Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. So seeing African nations and even the presence of Traoré in such meetings for us brings hope. And I think it's more of a will of growing internationalism and anti-imperialist struggle.
Okay, that's great. As the anti-neo-colonial movements across Africa gain momentum, like what you've been discussing, especially with the alliance of the Sahel states and the ejection of French imperialist forces, the US via AFRICOM has been seeking opportunities to replace them. What is your assessment of their ability to make headway? How much American US propaganda are you witnessing on the ground amongst the general public? Is it working to a large extent, or is it like, can people see through this sort of US imperialism soft power?
I think they can, because there's been a number. For instance, let me go back to Burkina Faso since the presidency of Ibrahim Traoré. So allow me begin by strongly condemning the recent failed coup attempts in Burkina Faso and other myriad attempts that have happened there before. And obviously, we know they are orchestrated by the imperialists through their regional and local proxies. For us, I think not just Burkina Faso, but African states, they have long history and have been a beacon of resistance and intellectual awakening in the fight against imperialism. And every day is a constant reminder of the indelible contribution of these countries towards their unfinished liberational struggles and building Pan-African unity. But also, in as much as we are in the fight against imperialism, we are also in a propaganda war and also in the battle of ideas. And for us right now, we understand that the popular ideas among the people is the ideas of the elite or the ruling class. And it's because that they have used media and other number of, let me call them social power to control the people. So media is significantly important. And it's not just the propaganda on now Burkina Faso, but we've seen the propaganda on Africa-China relations, the propaganda on issues to do with imperialism and war, and the approaches to the Russia-Ukraine war, the propaganda on the Palestinian plight, and very many. So I think our people are now waking up to this falsehood of, it's called bourgeoisie propaganda, because our urgent task at the moment as revolutionary forces is to struggle for unity among the global left to counter the propaganda of the ruling class from the northern hemisphere and from also these dominant media outlets that we know of. So like I said, hot topics of discussions that are usually propagated are mainly for the imperialist war, such as the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, the ongoing humanitarian crisis, and even the leadership of Captain Traoré. But I would like to demystify the claim of such falsehood in Africa. I think today or right now, we are witnessing massive developments in Burkina Faso. There is the privatization of agriculture through the mass distribution of tractors, motor pumps, farm equipments, and even a few farm inputs like indigenous seeds and fertilizers. And this has surged up production in that country. Also, when we get to look at critical areas of infrastructural development, there is a lot to commend the now government in Burkina Faso, mainly on the Africa China's kind of propaganda that we witness. I think Africans see a lot of opportunity with Chinese investments in Africa. And also, we have to understand that essentially the Communist Party of China doesn't necessarily have control of all the private Chinese investors all over the world. But also, we have to appreciate the state led projects in Africa. Even when we look at the onslaught of our Palestinian people in Gaza, I think for a long time, their struggle has been repressed. But right now, with the crisis in there, there is more elevation and more truth that people are becoming acquainted with. So I think even in the midst of having the imposition of bourgeois propaganda on our people, there are pockets of sparkling truth and actual realities of our people or the oppressed people in different parts of the world.
Yeah, because I mean, definitely the West accuses China of being the new colonial power in Africa. And from what you're saying, the general public doesn't believe that.
Yes, because right now we have alternative media to actually propagate alternative voices of the people. Because what is being propagated on the bourgeois media doesn't reflect the conditions and the realities of the people. But there are new alternative platforms on the continent that now people are able to get alternative understanding of what's happening. So I think the new emergence of this media has brought, I won't call it confusion, but has brought curiosity among the people to actually analyze more of what's happening worldwide. Yes, especially on the geopolitics of nations.
Yeah, another accusation levied against China is debt trap diplomacy, despite the over 100 interest-free loans that have been forgiven across Africa since 2000. Can you help us understand how much the China-Africa relations has made in the development of African nations? You've kind of spoken on it a little bit, but I'd like you to expand a little more.
Just to clarify, the claim that China is a new colonial power in Africa is a narrative, driven by the Western governments, the think tanks, and like I said earlier, the media outlets. However, this perspective is increasingly changing and increasingly viewed differently across Africa. And people have reduced that to simplistic and mainly deeply hypocritical, given that the West, they have long history of economic exploitation, intensified neo-colonial subjugation of our people, climate injustices and underdevelopment of the continent. So I must clarify that currently, even in Kenya, we see a lot of opportunity with Chinese investments on the continent. The partnership between China and Africa at large has not only spurred remarkable infrastructural development, but has also fostered a genuine cultural exchange between China and African communities. It has provided Africans with first-hand insights also into Chinese culture, dispelling the half-truths and misinformation perpetuated against China and its people. So for us, unlike the United States and the Western nations, which have historically imposed detrimental policies on African nations, through the Bretton Woods, if we are taking loans from IMF and World Bank, they come with austerity measures. And we also know of the infamous structural adjustment programs that really crippled the countries in Africa and, left a huge mark of pernicious poverty. But right now, China has adopted, or even before, when the relations began, China has adopted a policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states in the continent. And this shift has spurred African nations from the suffering and the misery and the hardship that came with the IMF, World Bank destructive. I call them destructive policies because there is no concrete kind of testament or manifestation of the loans that we've gotten from IMF. But just to give examples, like you said, public opinion is more complex and varies regionally. And this is based on a number of variant issues. But just to get into like giving example from different regions, in East Africa, generally there is high public approval of Chinese projects, or rather, maybe East African countries' partner projects with China's state. So, particularly when we speak about the infrastructure here in Kenya, we have the SGR in Kenya and also some industrial parks. However, also in different countries, such as maybe Uganda and talk of Tanzania, there is some concern about the debt sustainability and also the lack of job creation because of now when countries collaborate to have these projects, you'll get that at times they provide everything, even the labor. So there is a lot of concern about Chinese firms importing their own labor to do this work. In Southern Africa, mainly Zambia and South Africa and a few countries, there is mixed sentiments about Chinese role in Africa, but also there is great appreciation for the infrastructural development and trade. And particularly in Zambia, Zimbabwe, there a bit of criticism regarding the labor practices of Chinese companies and environmental degradation by some Chinese firms. But like I said before, it's really hard to say that the CPC has control of all the Chinese private firms on the African continent. Then in West Africa, countries like Nigeria and Ghana, there is varying opinions. So Nigeria has welcomed Chinese investment in sectors like railway, agriculture, and telecoms. But there is also concern about transparency between now the government and the people, because there seemed to be some lack of accountability between them. But good enough, in the Sahel region, these countries who were historically under the French dominance are increasingly looking at China as an alternative. So there is much enthusiasm in places like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and even Niger, where Chinese investment is seen as less politically controlling than French imperialism. So I think with such example, it's easier to analyze the public opinion and the claim that China is an neo-colonial power in Africa.
Thank you for watching the first part of our interview. Please head over to patreon.com/Empire Watch to watch the full episode. The podcast is also available as an audio on Spotify and Amazon Music every Saturday.